The studio lights blazed like interrogation lamps, casting every bead of sweat and flicker of expression into sharp relief. Millions of eyes were glued to the screens as Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her voice rising to a fever pitch. She jabbed her finger across the table, each word sharpened into an insult. "You are nothing but a grandstander, a fake who cares more about drama than truth." The air seemed to shudder under the weight of her anger. For a moment, the set felt less like a debate and more like a courtroom with no judge, only a prosecutor hell-bent on humiliation. Viewers at home could almost feel the vibration of her fury, the bitterness cutting through the broadcast like broken glass. Some in the audience gasped. Others shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't debate, it was an ambush. But here's where the scene took a turn no one expected. Across the table, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat still, her posture unflinching, her eyes steady. She didn't flinch at the barrage. She didn't raise her voice in return. She simply allowed the storm to rage, calm as stone while Conway's voice cracked under its own volume. That silence, composed, deliberate, was more powerful than any shouted rebuttal. It was the silence of a woman who knew her dignity was her weapon. Twitter feeds lit up in real time. "Why is she so calm?" one viewer typed. "She's about to end this woman's career," another predicted. Hashtags began to form before the confrontation had even peaked. The public sensed it. Something unforgettable was about to unfold. The camera cut briefly to Conway again, her words spilling faster, more erratic. Yet the harder she pushed, the more the contrast grew. One woman raging, the other waiting. It was a collision of two Americas, one built on fury and spectacle, the other on resilience and restraint. And then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward ever so slightly, her lips parting with a quiet breath. In that instant, the atmosphere shifted. Viewers sat forward. The audience froze. The outburst had reached its peak. The silence was about to break. Because what came out of her mouth next would not just calm the storm, it would create shockwaves that reverberated far beyond that studio, echoing across the nation. The silence broke with a measured breath, but Jasmine did not leap to answer immediately. Instead, she allowed the weight of Conway's tirade to linger in the air, like smoke that choked its own fire. That pause told the audience everything. She was in control, not the person shouting across from her. But to understand why this mattered so deeply, we have to step back, because this was not just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of values, a confrontation that cut to the heart of who gets to define truth in America. Kellyanne Conway was not just another pundit. She represented an entire political machine that had thrived on distortion, spin, and calculated outrage. Her presence on that stage symbolized years of gaslighting, years of turning lies into headlines, years of dismissing women of color as if their voices carried less weight. When she raised her voice at Crockett, she wasn't just speaking to her. She was speaking to every immigrant family told to wait their turn. She was speaking to every young black woman told she was too loud or too angry. And in that moment, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Because Jasmine Crockett was not just a congresswoman defending herself. She was a proxy for millions who had felt the sting of dismissal. Her calm was not weakness, it was defiance. It was her way of saying, "You will not bait me, you will not diminish me, and you will not rewrite the story of who belongs here." Viewers at home felt the electricity. Social media posts poured in, framing the confrontation as a cultural battle. "This isn't about two women arguing," one tweet declared. "This is about the future of political discourse." Another viral post read, "Crockett's silence is every immigrant mom who held her head high when neighbors tried to shame her." People weren't just watching a TV segment. They were watching themselves represented on screen. The producers in the control room could sense it too. Camera angles tightened. Microphones were adjusted to catch every breath, every glance. They knew what the audience knew. History was unfolding in real time. And that is why the tension grew unbearable. Conway, sensing her dominance, slipping away, doubled down. She waved papers, cited half-truths, and spat out rehearsed talking points. But every word only magnified the imbalance. The louder she grew, the more composed Crockett appeared. The villain thought she was tightening the noose, but she was actually tying her own knots. The stakes were now crystal clear. This wasn't just about who won the debate. It was about whether dignity could still triumph in a political culture addicted to rage. It was about whether facts, composure, and identity could rise above noise. And in that crucible of live television, Crockett prepared to answer, not just for herself, but for everyone watching who had been told to sit down and stay quiet. The nation leaned forward. The hashtags kept climbing. And then, with the faintest of smiles, Jasmine lifted her microphone. What she was about to say would not only shift the balance of the debate, it would rewrite the power dynamic on live television in a way that no one could ignore. Before Jasmine Crockett's calm reply sent shockwaves through the nation, it's worth pausing to ask, who exactly was she facing? Who was this woman screaming across the table, finger jabbing like a dagger, eyes burning with a mixture of certainty and desperation? To understand the magnitude of what unfolded that night, we have to step into the world of Kellyanne Conway, because she didn't just walk into that studio as an individual. She carried years of political theater, contradictions, and controversies on her shoulders. Kellyanne Conway made her name not by quietly crafting policy, but by turning spin into an art form. She had been the architect of carefully worded deceptions, able to twist narratives so smoothly that half-truths sounded like gospel. Alternative facts, the phrase that once ignited laughter and outrage across America, was her signature. It summed up the audacity of a political class that believed they could bend reality itself. And yet, for years, she thrived. She became a symbol of a political era where bluster often mattered more than truth, where confidence carried more weight than evidence. To her supporters, she was brilliant, quick, and unflinching. To her critics, she was the embodiment of gaslighting, dismissive, manipulative, and shameless in her defense of the indefensible. That dual reputation was what made this clash so riveting. Conway walked into the studio expecting to dominate. After all, she had sparred with journalists, academics, even world leaders' representatives, and walked away unshaken. She had perfected the rhythm. Interrupt, overtalk, redirect, never concede. It wasn't just a debate strategy. It was her entire professional DNA. But here's the contradiction. The very qualities that once made her untouchable had begun to curdle in the public eye. The same certainty now looked like arrogance. The same dismissals now felt like bullying. And when those tactics were turned against someone like Jasmine Crockett, a young black congresswoman representing the promise of a new political generation, they carried an uglier resonance. The outrage on social media during the broadcast wasn't just about the words Conway used. It was about the long shadow of history. A white political insider shouting down a black woman on live television wasn't seen as a debate tactic. It was seen as a metaphor for decades of silencing, a continuation of a script America had seen too many times before. Even Conway's body language told a story. Leaning forward, cutting off responses, raising her volume to dominate. It was the posture of someone who believed power was her birthright. And yet, in the cold lens of the camera, it didn't project strength. It projected fear. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of losing control. Fear of watching a new generation rise that no longer bowed to the old rules of deference. Critics who had followed Conway's career could see the unraveling in real time. She was using the same tactics she always had, but the audience had changed. People were no longer dazzled by spin. They craved authenticity, dignity, and voices that spoke from lived experience. And across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, the very embodiment of that shift. That's what made this showdown so combustible. Conway was not just lashing out at one congresswoman. She was striking at the changing face of American power. And yet, every word she hurled only underscored the contrast. She had built her career on dominating the stage. But on this night, she had met someone who refused to play her game. The irony was bitter. Conway had once been a master of controlling narratives. But here, live on television, she was losing the narrative in real time. The more she talked, the more unhinged she appeared. the more she attacked, the more composed her opponent looked. And millions of viewers sensed it. History was tilting. What Conway didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her tirade was about to backfire in spectacular fashion. Because the woman sitting across from her, calm and unshaken, carried a story far more powerful than any insult. And that story, the one Conway never saw coming, would not just answer her attack. It would redefine the moment, turning an attempted takedown into an origin story for a new kind of political hero. Long before Jasmine Crockett found herself under the glare of studio lights, she had learned the power of composure. Her story was not written in the quiet offices of Washington insiders, but in the crowded neighborhoods of Dallas, in the courthouses where ordinary people fought for dignity, and in the long nights spent defending those without power. To understand why she sat so calmly while Kellyanne Conway unleashed a storm, we have to understand where she came from, and why silence, for her, was not surrender but strength. Born in St. Louis, raised in modest surroundings, Jasmine didn't come from political royalty. She didn't inherit networks of influence or family connections to Washington's elite. She earned every inch of her place through struggle, grit, and the unshakable belief that justice is not a privilege, but a right. In her early career, she became a public defender, standing beside clients who couldn't afford the polished lawyers hired by the wealthy. Her job was not glamorous. It was grueling. Long hours, difficult cases, and constant battles with a system tilted against the poor. But it was in those trenches that she discovered her calling. She saw firsthand how the voiceless were treated, how the marginalized were silenced, and how the system too often worked to protect power rather than people. Those experiences burned into her a quiet fire, one that would later define her political style. She learned that yelling rarely changes a system. But persistence, strategy, and dignity, those can move mountains. When she later ran for office, the odds were stacked against her. She was young. She was outspoken. She was unapologetically herself in a political landscape that often demanded conformity. Yet, that authenticity resonated. People saw in her not a polished career politician, but someone who had lived the struggles they lived. She represented the immigrant families scraping to build a better life, the working mothers juggling 2 jobs, the young people disillusioned with politics, but hungry for a leader who looked like them, spoke like them, and carried their experiences in her heart. That authenticity carried her to Congress. And once there, she didn't blend into the wallpaper. She spoke up. She fought hard. And she earned a reputation for being unflinching, whether questioning corporate greed or challenging those who weaponize politics for personal gain. She was not loud for the sake of being loud. She was loud for those who had no microphone of their own. That is why, on the night of her confrontation with Kellyanne Conway, she didn't need to shout. Her very presence carried the weight of her story. Viewers who knew her history understood immediately. Here was a woman who had faced bigger storms than one shouting pundit. She had already fought for people who had been told they didn't matter. She had already stared down systems designed to silence her. Compared to those battles, Conway's yelling was just noise. And yet, her composure that night wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. For millions watching, her silence represented the patience of communities who had been told, for generations, to wait their turn. It represented the dignity of immigrants who faced mockery but pressed on. It represented the resilience of women of color who had been told they were too much but refused to shrink. Every second she sat calmly was a statement. We will not be rattled, we will not be diminished, and we will not let arrogance define the narrative. Her supporters watching at home felt seen. One woman tweeted, "I wish my grandmother, who marched for civil rights, could see this. Jasmine is carrying her spirit." Another wrote, "This isn't just her fight, it's our fight." Crockett had become more than an individual in that moment. She was a vessel for collective pride, a mirror reflecting the struggles and dignity of millions. And it wasn't just her supporters who felt the power of her presence. Journalists in the room noticed it too. One described the scene as a masterclass in restraint. Another wrote, "Her silence was louder than the shouting." Even critics, grudgingly, admitted that she had refused to play by Conway's rules, and in doing so, had changed the rules of engagement entirely. That is the paradox of Jasmine Crockett's story. She rose from humble beginnings to the halls of power, not by mimicking the arrogance of those who came before her, but by embodying a new kind of strength, rooted in authenticity, dignity, and identity. She did not just survive the noise. She outlasted it. And on that night, as the cameras rolled and millions leaned forward, all of that history, the courtroom battles, the campaign trails, the nights spent fighting for the voiceless, coalesced into one defining moment. She had been prepared for this. Every chapter of her life had led her here. The calm smile she gave before speaking wasn't just composure. It was destiny. What she was about to say would not just answer Kellyanne Conway. It would ignite a clash so fierce, so dramatic, that the entire debate would spiral into a test of composure versus chaos, truth versus distortion. The smile faded, and the debate floor grew tighter, charged with an invisible current. Kellyanne Conway, sensing the cameras shifting toward Crockett, doubled down with renewed fury. Her words snapped like a whip. "You've never accomplished anything of substance. You're a lightweight, a pretender who cares more about appearances than governing." Each insult was thrown like a stone, meant to bruise not only Crockett, but everyone who saw themselves in her. Crockett did not interrupt. She let Conway finish every barb, even as the audience stirred in discomfort. The calm was disarming, and yet the silence made Conway reckless. She spoke faster, her voice cracking at the edges, losing rhythm. It wasn't Crockett who looked rattled. It was Conway herself, exposed by her own impatience. At home, viewers typed furiously, "She's unraveling." Conway shouting because she knows she's losing. The audience could feel the tilt. What began as a one-sided tirade was transforming into a spectacle of self-destruction. Conway was swinging wildly, hoping to land a knockout blow, but each miss only left her more vulnerable. Crockett finally spoke, not to retaliate, but to clarify. "I hear your accusations," she began softly, her voice a striking contrast to the chaos. "But what I hear most is fear. Fear of change. Fear of accountability." Her words weren't shouted. They were precise, deliberate, and heavy, and the weight of them landed. Conway smirked dismissively, but her eyes darted toward the cameras, aware that the narrative was slipping from her grasp. The moderator attempted to intervene, but Conway cut him off, launching again into a stream of talking points, old slogans polished thin from overuse. The interruptions grew frantic. Crockett's restraint became even more powerful, a mirror reflecting the imbalance. The nation was watching one woman unravel and another hold steady. And then came the tipping point. Conway, red-faced and gripping her notes like a lifeline, shouted, "You don't belong in this conversation." The words echoed like a gavel strike, harsh and unmistakable. Gasps erupted in the studio. Viewers at home froze. That wasn't just a political jab. It was a dismissal, a declaration that Crockett, and by extension everyone she represented, was unworthy of equal footing. That was the moment everything changed. The debate was no longer about policies or talking points. It was about belonging, identity, and the dignity of representation. And Jasmine Crockett, steady and unshaken, prepared to seize it. She leaned forward, the hint of steel in her eyes. Her hands rested calmly on the table, but her voice, when it came, carried the weight of generations. The room fell silent. Even Conway's interruptions faltered, as if some instinct warned her that what was coming would not be easy to shake off. Viewers at home sensed it too. This is it, one viral tweet read. "She's about to shut it all down." The escalation had reached its peak. The insults, the shouting, the attempts to diminish, all of it had led to this one breathless pause. And in the stillness, Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth to deliver a reply so devastating, so unflinchingly calm, that would flip the debate on its head and send shockwaves far beyond the studio. The room seemed to hold its breath. Cameras zoomed in, catching the fire in Kellyanne Conway's eyes, the tension in her jaw, the smirk of someone convinced she had silenced her opponent. But across from her, Jasmine Crockett leaned in ever so slightly, her posture unbent, her voice carrying a calm that cut sharper than any shout. "You say I don't belong," Crockett began, her tone measured, resonant. "But I belong here more than your insults ever will." The words dropped like a pin in a cathedral, ringing louder for their restraint. A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. Viewers online pounded their keyboards, typing furiously as if to release the energy building inside them. Conway shifted, opening her mouth to retort, but Crockett lifted her hand slightly, not to silence, but to command the room's attention. "You call me a pretender," she continued, "but my career began standing next to people who had nothing. No lobbyists, no donors, no million-dollar connections. People who were thrown aside by a system that saw them as expendable. And I fought for them because no one else would. That is not pretense. That is purpose." The crowd erupted in applause. Even a moderator seemed stunned, his hand frozen above his notes. Conway forced a tight smile, but her eyes betrayed her discomfort. Crockett wasn't sparring. She was dismantling. Piece by piece, insult by insult, she was turning Conway's attack into a mirror of her own contradictions. Crockett pressed on. "You talk about fear? You're right. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what happens when voices like yours are allowed to drown out the truth. I'm afraid of what happens when women who look like me are told we don't belong, even after we've earned every single inch of our place. But here's the difference between us. I don't run from that fear. I face it. I channel it. And I turn it into the fuel that makes me fight harder." Twitter feeds exploded. Hashtag Jasmine Strong. Hashtag Fearless. Hashtag She Belongs. Conway attempted to interrupt, but Crockett's composure was unshakable. "You build a career on alternative facts," Crockett said, her voice steady as steel. "I built mine on real people. You spin narratives for those in power. I tell the stories of those who were silenced. And maybe that's why your shouting doesn't move me. Because your anger is performance. My calm? My calm is survival." That line hit like a thunderclap. Social media seized it instantly, screenshots and clips flooding timelines. "My calm is survival" trended within minutes. Viewers watching live whispered to themselves, as if they'd witnessed history compressed into a single sentence. Crockett didn't stop there. She leaned closer, her eyes locked on Conway's. "You say I care more about drama than governing. But tell me, what's more dramatic than standing before millions of people and trying to shout another woman into silence? What's more performative than thinking the loudest voice wins the truth?" The audience roared. Conway's face flushed deeper, her notes trembling in her hands. For the first time in her career, the practiced confidence faltered. "And here's the thing," Crockett said, lowering her voice, forcing the room to lean in. "You don't just shout at me. You shout at every immigrant family who believed in America enough to build their lives here. You shout at every black woman who was told she was too much, too loud, too angry. You shout at every kid who grew up hearing they didn't belong. But what you can't stand, what you'll never silence, is the truth that we are here. We belong, and we aren't going anywhere." The studio audience erupted into standing applause. Online, the moment went viral in real time. Clips were shared, captions attached, the moment Jasmine Crockett ended Kellyanne Conway. Hashtag soared. Commentators on other networks began replaying the feed, unable to ignore the force of what had just unfolded. Conway tried to recover, fumbling through her notes, raising her voice again. But the momentum had shifted irrevocably. Every word she spoke sounded smaller, less certain, as though the gravity of Crockett's words had drained the energy from her performance. Crockett, however, wasn't finished. She turned from Conway to the camera, speaking directly to the viewers. "If you've ever been told you don't belong, know this. Your dignity is not up for debate. Your place in this country isn't a question mark. And no amount of shouting will erase the truth of who you are." The crowd cheered so loudly that the moderator struggled to restore order. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The debate was over, not because of who spoke the longest or the loudest, but because Crockett's words had cut deeper than politics. They had reached the soul, and in that moment, the hero and the villain were no longer equal combatants. The imbalance was exposed for all to see. Kellyanne Conway had tried to bury Crockett under insults. Instead, she had handed her the stage, and Crockett had turned it into a pulpit for dignity, resilience, and truth. But even as the studio buzzed and the internet lit up, no one yet realized just how far those words would travel, or how deeply they would shake the political world in the days that followed. The studio was still vibrating with applause long after the cameras cut to commercial. But the true explosion wasn't in the studio, it was online. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm takedown of Kellyanne Conway spread across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram like wildfire. The line, "My calm is survival," became a rallying cry. Memes, GIFs, and hashtags carried it into every corner of the internet. For once, politics felt less like noise and more like a cultural moment people wanted to be part of. One clip racked up 1 million views in under an hour. Another, shared by a college student in New York, was captioned, "This is what representation looks like." It spread across timelines like gospel. By midnight, hashtag #SheBelongs was trending globally. Athletes, musicians, and even Hollywood actors weighed in. One actress tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just spoke for every woman who's ever been talked over in a room." Another wrote, "That calm? That's the strength of 1,000 ancestors." Meanwhile, the political world scrambled to catch up. Pundits who had dismissed Crockett as inexperienced now called her performance a masterclass in restraint. Analysts debated the strategy, some calling it brilliant, others insisting it was instinct. But even her critics had to admit she had owned the moment. Kellyanne Conway's tirade was already fading into irrelevance, overshadowed by the viral echo of Crockett's words. The ripple effects didn't stop at commentary. Young activists shared the clip at rallies, chanting, "We belong," in unison. Teachers played it in classrooms as an example of dignity under pressure. Community organizers wove Crockett's words into speeches, reminding people that silence in the face of chaos can be a weapon, not a weakness. It wasn't just a soundbite anymore. It was a symbol. And Conway, the fallout for her was swift and brutal. Late-night comedians replayed her shouting on loop, mocking her red face and trembling notes. Editorials described her as the face of a fading political style, loud, angry, desperate. Even some of her allies admitted privately that the optics were terrible. She had meant to humiliate Crockett. Instead, she had given her opponent the biggest viral platform of her career. But for Crockett, the aftermath was more than just a career boost. It was vindication. People who had never heard her name before now saw her as a voice of calm power, a woman who refused to be rattled. She received thousands of messages from strangers, single mothers, immigrants, students, veterans, all thanking her for representing them when it mattered. One viral post read simply, "She carried us all with her." The debate was no longer just a segment on television. It had become a cultural flashpoint, a dividing line between the politics of rage and the politics of dignity. Every share, every comment, every hashtag deepened that divide. For days, the media dissected the moment, but the consensus was clear. Crockett hadn't just won the exchange. She had shifted the conversation, and yet the story was far from over. Because in the midst of the praise and the viral momentum, one deeper truth began to surface, one that went beyond Crockett, beyond Conway, and even beyond politics itself. The moment wasn't just about who shouted or who stayed calm. It was about what kind of America people wanted to see reflected back at them. And that question, the one no one could ignore, was about to reshape the entire narrative. In the days that followed, as the noise of pundits and headlines began to settle, what lingered most was not the shouting, not the insults, not even the drama of a live television clash. What lingered was Jasmine Crockett's calm. It was the memory of her refusal to be dragged into the pit, the way she transformed an attack into a universal truth. Her words were more than a reply to Kellyanne Conway. They were a message to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, to anyone who had ever been dismissed because of who they were or where they came from. In that moment, Crockett gave voice to a quiet revolution. That dignity is not weakness, that composure is not silence, and that belonging cannot be granted by those who shout the loudest. It is claimed by standing tall, even when the room tries to shrink you. People began quoting her in churches, mosques, classrooms, and town halls. "My calm is survival" appeared on protest signs and social media bios. But what resonated most deeply was the lesson behind the words. Survival is not passive. It is active. It is intentional. It is the power to endure without surrendering the essence of who you are. Crockett's calm did not erase the venom of Conway's attack, but it robbed it of its power. And that is the lesson so many carried forward. The villains of politics thrive on chaos. They thrive on baiting their opponents into the same ugliness, hoping to drag them down into the mud. But Crockett showed another way. She showed that refusing to match rage with rage is not weakness. It is mastery. It is the ability to choose the higher ground and to let the truth speak louder than the noise. This was not just about one debate or one clash of personalities. It was about the America that people wanted to believe in. An America where dignity could triumph over derision. An America where calm voices could cut through the noise of cruelty. An America where the children watching at home could see that composure, intelligence, and courage could be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than volume or venom. For so many, this moment reminded them why representation matters. Seeing someone hold steady under fire wasn't just inspirational, it was affirming. It said, "You are not alone. Your identity, your struggle, your calm in the face of adversity, it all matters." That validation, that sense of collective pride, was perhaps the most powerful ripple of all. And as the days turned into weeks, people didn't just remember Jasmine Crockett's words. They remembered the silence that followed, the stunned quiet in which a nation held its breath, realizing they had witnessed more than just a debate. They had witnessed a lesson in how to live, how to resist, and how to stand unshaken in the face of those who try to erase you. In that silence, America was reminded, dignity is louder than hate. The cameras may have stopped rolling that night, but the story didn't end there. What happened between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett was more than a clash of personalities. It was a mirror held up to America. One side shouted, insulted, and tried to diminish. The other stood firm, calm, and unshaken. And in that contrast, millions saw exactly what kind of future they wanted to belong to. Moments like this don't come often. They cut through the noise, they stay with us. They remind us that the struggle for dignity is not abstract. It is lived, it is felt, it is fought for every single day. Crockett's calm wasn't just her own. It was borrowed strength, drawn from every person who has ever been told they don't belong, and it returned to them tenfold. And that's why this story matters beyond the headlines. Because it tells us that no matter how loud the voices of arrogance and division become, they cannot drown out the steady heartbeat of truth. Dignity is not fragile. Belonging is not optional. And calm, when rooted in justice, is unbreakable. So as you finish this video, ask yourself, which side of this story do you want to stand on? The side that shouts to silence others, or the side that speaks with calm to lift us all? If you believe in the power of dignity, in the strength of representation, in a future that Jasmine Crockett stood for that night, then don't just watch. Join, subscribe, share this story, carry it into your own conversations. Be part of the movement that insists on belonging for everyone. Because this isn't just Jasmine's moment, it's ours.